Hey Mitch, how are you doing today?
Hey Jeff, good afternoon. I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Well, thank you for joining Indispensable Appraisers. So, first question out of the gate, as a valuation industry, what do you think we're winning at? What are we doing great at as appraisers?
When I think of the appraisal profession, there's multiple valuation disciplines, and I think appraisers are thriving and winning across many of those disciplines. You think of there's bank and financing work, and then uh, eminent domain, estate planning, property tax appeal. When I think of the work that our company does, and I talk and view other appraisal firms across the country, I believe we're providing incredible value and solving some very complex valuation problems. I think right now we're, of course, in a market downturn. We've been working on more property tax appeal assignments. That has a direct impact on property owners. And when you can work and solve the valuation problems that they're dealing with, it provides some level of, it alleviates some of that tax burden. And then, across different disciplines in eminent domain, when and another example I'll share that for me really helped me understand, like, here's how we as appraisers can provide more value, and where I think it's incredibly important to continue to provide this kind of service is there's a property owner I know that owns a lot of real estate across the entire metropolitan area. He's been buying up land for many years. And over the span of a few years, he had multiple properties that, again, are going to be ripe for development in the next 5 to 10 years. But because of different road projects, his development potential was getting changed drastically, whether it was a loss of access or a road coming through that property. And, initially he was concerned, but by really diving under the hood and really understanding the valuation impact to that property, he was at least able to get a fair outcome, what he felt was reasonable and fair. And that's led to more assignments with this individual. And I think, to me, it's the opportunity to provide that higher level of service that these owners need. And of course, on the government agency side too, providing that ability to negotiate fairly and provide the desired outcomes. Obviously, we can't dictate the specific value outcomes, but provide the best level of outcome possible in those kind of scenarios.
Great, I appreciate that. Next question, what challenges, what are our biggest challenges do you think we have in the valuation space?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, I've been in the industry now for almost 20 years, and it seems like I would classify it as the low level bank work. There's been a lot of pressure and a constant push. You've got lobby pressure at a governmental level, it seems at times. And, I don't do a lot of residential work, but I know peers that do, and kind of just being aware of it in the industry. There's been that push for more consolidation and, these appraisal management companies. And then even on the commercial side, some of the more basic $500,000 to $1 million type properties, those values I recognize and can understand from the lender property owner perspective how maybe all appraisals don't provide that same high level of value, and that's a challenge. But I think it's also just learning to embrace it and adopt and roll with the times. Like, you can't change that perspective. And it's also a push with technology and the speed to increase the transaction time on closing and those kind of things. So I think of the appraisal profession, we've been able to provide a few different alternative valuation options to roll with that, and you just got to embrace it. But it's going to be there, and just learning to pivot and find the other valuation opportunities is key. The other piece that I've seen, and I don't know if it's more just because of the market downturn that we're in, I'm on social media, I use LinkedIn a lot, and there's at times this perception, maybe stigma. I've seen it from other real estate practitioners, professionals, that they like to maybe throw a little shade at appraisers in terms of I don't quite understand why, because I mean, we're in the trenches and we're striving to provide the highest level of value, but almost kind of like throwing the appraiser under the bus in a way. And I guess, you know, we can't control that if that's their perception at times, but what we can control and what I believe is important is I think as appraisers as a whole, we have, again, this opportunity to provide massive value in many different aspects along the way. And I used to think when I know when I first started confirming comparable data, for instance, when I was early on in my career, it scared me. It was intimidating. I didn't know the terminology. And, you know, you're always reaching out and trying to get this information to help understand how these transactions transpired. And one thing that really shifted my perspective and really ignited like the ability to see how we can provide the greater value is instead of always reaching out and trying to collect information, which we do, it's part of our assignment, part of our obligation, but how can we provide greater value to that market participant that we're working with? And if we have market data, market intel, something to offer in exchange, I believe that has the ability to raise the bar for everyone. So that way they're getting something of value, and then it becomes like a more of a fun conversation. I think that's where the real gold lies as appraisers. It allows us to better understand the details of the transactions, the marketplace, and then quite frankly, allows us to raise the bar in terms of adding greater value, and something I really strive to help teach and train my employees and trainee appraisers as they're coming up to really adopt and embrace that idea of how can we as appraisers be providing more value on a consistent basis.
Great answer. And last question, what do you recommend we do to improve? What recommendations looking forward through the windshield?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's an interesting question. One observation I've had over the last couple of years, again, I mentioned I've been appraising for almost 20 years now. And I would say, I mean, appraisal writing at times, it can be a pressure cooker dealing with deadlines, and coming through 2021, 2022, we had, at least from my perspective, the greatest demand in terms of volume and transaction velocity. And I would say I almost started hitting a point of burnout just because the pace of work was so intense. And I started to talk to other appraisers across the country, had many conversations. These are 15 to 30-year veterans with incredible skill sets. They have the ability to provide a lot of value, and some of them have actually left the industry. But I think here's what shaped my perspective and allowed me to get reinvigorated and really excited on how I can continue to improve and thrive in this appraisal industry is I think appraisers have an ability to provide and build a lifestyle with their appraisal practice that allows them to not only enjoy the work that they're doing, but enhance their life. I'm going to share a quick story, if that's okay. You know, in 2015, we're based in the Midwest in Minnesota. We work across a few different states primarily, but I had an opportunity to work on a large portfolio across Minnesota, North Dakota, and Montana. It's an 18-hour drive to Montana. A lot of it is flat, boring country, but it would have been a probably 4 or 5 day work trip, hammer out there, eating out of, quick restaurants and by myself, and come back probably pretty worn out. But we had an RV, and we decided to pack in the kids and turn that 4-day work trip into like an 11, 12-day camping adventure. We were looking at retail stores so I could stop in during the day, during retail store hours. And that opportunity, that made me realize, like, if I get more intentional about how I build my life and having a vision of what excites me there, then I can start to be more intentional about building an appraisal business that supports that and enhances it. And it really just changed everything. It's really one of our favorite family trips. Even though I was working on part of it, as appraisers, most of us probably work a lot anyway. So it was an ability, it provided that opportunity to weave everything that I love to do into one trip. And I think as I've talked with these other appraisers across the country, if we have the ability to really understand like what work you love to do, who do you love to work with in terms of client type, property type, you've developed these high levels of skills, and we have the ability to solve some really complex valuation problems. If you understand and really start to get intentional about stacking up your business so you can spend more time in those zones of genius, and then you combine it with getting more clear on what it is and what you love to do on your personal life, I think the appraisal profession continues to provide a really excellent lifestyle type business that allows us to thrive, and we can continue to provide massive value for the real estate community as a whole.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really like your discussion about intention, designing a life. But I've got to ask you, because one of the reasons I started, a lot of different reasons why I started the podcast, but one of which is I do think appraisers are somewhat isolated. You started off talking about, people throwing shade at appraisers, and there's no voice, there's no narrative coming back, right? Whether it be appraisal bias or just showing up on expert panels for CRE, you just don't see appraisers. So I think they've been isolated somewhat. So one of the reasons for this podcast, and I appreciate your time today, is enthusiasm. So I have to ask you, what is that behind you? You've achieved enthusiasm. Tell me the story about that.
Yeah, so nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. I would say it's a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. I'm a big believer in enthusiasm, and there's different real estate professionals that I follow, even on LinkedIn, and they talk about it. I would say it started for me when I was 19 years old. I was working for my aunt and uncle in a small family business. She sent me down to see Zig Ziglar at the Target Center in Minneapolis. He was, I think, 76 years old at the time. There was 20,000 people in that room, and he had 20,000 people excited and on their feet at 8 o'clock in the morning. I had never seen anything like it. And the big thing that he had was that enthusiasm. And it just ignited something inside of me that whatever it is you're doing, if you can apply enthusiasm and have it backed with passion and purpose for where you're headed, it's going to really help you craft it and take you a long ways.
Awesome. Well, Mitch, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jeff. Thanks for having me.